Hello and welcome to ACCA F1 Chapter 6 on Professional Ethics. Now, the definition of ethics is a set of moral principles and values that guide behaviour. So they are your own moral principles and values. Now, in a political and legal environment, you have laws, regulations and standards that are necessary for a business to flourish. So the law of the land. And therefore it includes contracts that must be honoured and are enforceable. So we looked at common law in chapter 1. Bribery and corruption must not be tolerated, and obeying the law is the minimum expected of a member of society. So they say the law is the floor. And there are two key terms that do come up in the exam: grease money. So these are payments to secure something that we are perhaps legally entitled to. And so it could be legal, but is it ethical? And so when we say grease, we're effectively smoothing someone's palm. And in some countries, it is a normal practice. It's a normal custom to provide grease money. However, on the other side, you have bribery, and these are payments to secure something that we are not legally entitled to. And the Bribery Act that came in 2010 made bribing someone illegal. So just be aware of that. So there's a thin line between grease money and bribery. Now, organisations contain a variety of ethical systems which influence behaviour. Whose behaviour? Well, the staff's behaviour. So personal ethics, professional ethics, organisational culture, organisational systems. So 4 elements to this. And so we've looked at ethics. So what is the organisational culture? So how are you to customers? And organisational systems, well, tills, for instance, that you have in place to stop people stealing. And so a profession has its own ethical standards and codes which all members are expected to adhere to, and other types of occupations may have standards and codes but not for ethics. Okay, so how do ethics apply to accountants? So ethics and accountants. So accountants should consider public interest and social responsibility. So for instance, if you are helping Google avoid tax, is that ethical? You're applying the law to minimise their tax, but remember, tax is collected for the benefit of the society as a whole, for public welfare. Ethical behaviour helps to maintain an image of accountants generally. So we have to be seen to be behaving ethically. Accountants must be trustworthy. So there's a reputation in society that accountants have to uphold. If you're not trustworthy, then people aren't really going to trust you with your money, are they? And this improves the employability of accountants. So the accountancy profession has a strong reputation in society. Accountants are good people, and therefore it helps your employability. And so accountants should consider the ethical and social implications of decisions rather than restricting their input to discussing the impact of decisions on the financial statement. So as I mentioned, you're helping Google avoid tax. Is that ethical? You might be helping them financially, but it's not in the public interest. Accountants must display the following characteristics: professionalism. An accountant should be clearly identifiable as a professional person. And that's the reason why accountants are able to sign the back of people's passport photos, because we're seen to be professionals. Provide high quality services. All services should be carried out to the highest standards of performance because clients are paying you for that service. Credibility. Information and information systems that you use must be credible. And confidence. Users of accountants should feel confident that there is a framework of professional ethics to govern the provision of services. So if everyone acts like this, our profession becomes stronger. Now, IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, emphasises the requirements for accountants to act in the public interest, and this applies globally. Just be sure of that, it's international. This means considering the interests of society as a whole as well as the interests of the accountant to their employer. And IFAC have issued a code of ethics that the ACCA and its members must adhere to. So when you're thinking about ethics, the key workers that come to mind are bankers. So as soon as a few people act in a way that seems non-ethical, public lose trust in all bankers. So not all bankers acted unethically, but now we think of all of them being the same. We tarnish them all with the same brush. Okay, so section 2 deals with the fundamental principles of the IFAC code, and a good way to remember it is by using the acronym CIPOP. And you see these principles come up time and time again throughout all of your studies. You'll definitely see them appear again in F8 in auditing. So what are they then? Well, the first one being confidentiality. Respect the confidentiality of information and do not disclose such information to third parties. So if you're privy to confidential information, well, you shouldn't really be discussing that with your friends. You shouldn't be discussing client information in a pub that other people can hear into your conversation. Integrity. Now this involves being straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. Professional behaviour. Comply with laws and regulations, and professional behaviour 24/7. You shouldn't do anything that brings your profession into disrepute. Objectivity. You shouldn't allow bias, conflict of interest or undue influence of others to override the profession or your judgments. And a key thing that you may be tested on with regard to objectivity are fees. I have seen this come up again. So the objectivity of a member is likely to be jeopardised when the fees for audit and recurring work for one client exceeds 10% for listed and public interest companies and 15% for other companies of the firm's total fees. Just be aware of those thresholds. And finally, professional competence and due care. You need to continue to maintain your professional knowledge. Now, this is more relevant for your role that you're partaking in. If you are a tax accountant, you need to have knowledge of all the up-to-date tax laws, but you perhaps may not need to know about hedging or derivative transactions, complex financial transactions. Okay, so these are examples of everything that you should think about when you take on work. Section 3 then, the conceptual framework. Now the ACCA advocates a conceptual framework to guide ethical behaviour rather than prescriptive rules. And the reason being it's impossible to legislate every situation that the accountant may encounter. So you have a framework that you go to for advice, and so it's all about that argument of rules versus the framework. So it's more about principles rather than checklists, because the attitude in the US is all about ticking off checklists, whereas in the UK we adhere to a conceptual framework. And continual personal improvement and lifelong learning are the heart of the ACCA membership that you've embarked on. And so all members have an obligation to ensure that you are competent in the role that you're partaking in. Okay, the next section, section 4 on personal qualities required of an accountant, and the way to remember it, CTR to the power 3. Now these do come up. You might need to distinguish between personal quantities, qualities, and professional qualities. So just be aware of the difference. So the first one being courtesy. Accountants should conduct themselves with courtesy and consideration towards all that they come into contact with during the course of performing their work, be it the senior partner or the receptionist in the role. Timeliness, produce work on time, arrive on time for work and meetings. Be reliable. Take on responsibility for your own work. And respect. Develop constructive relationships and respect other people's perspectives. And again, these personal qualities, you should adhere to 24/7. And professional qualities required, again, an easy way to remember them, sassy. Skepticism, accountants should question information supplied to them. Where is it from? Is it this supporting the evidence? Who supplied it? Why was it supplied? So acting like a watchdog, professional skepticism. So this is for information that the client gives you, so provisions, budgets, and so on. Accountability. The accountant is accountable for his own actions and decisions. He should not pass on the buck. So when you produce work, you must stand by it as if it had your name written all over it. Social responsibility. Be aware of the work that may affect the public. For example, accounting profits may be used by a wide range of users, investors, employees, suppliers, and so on. So the work that you're producing, other people rely on it. And independence. Have an independent mind. Produce work that is free from bias and prejudice. So take into account the fundamental principles of the IFAC code that we looked at the top here. And accountants are required to identify, evaluate, and address threats to compliance with the fundamental principles. Okay, the consequentialist approach to ethics. This focuses on the consequences which any action might have in order to make the correct moral or ethical choices. So when we make choices which result in correct consequences, we are acting morally. And when we make choices that result in incorrect consequences, we are acting immorally. So there are a couple of approaches. Again, they could be tested in the exam. Utilitarianism. This measures the quality of outcome in terms of the greatest happiness for the greatest number. What is best for the majority? So it's about everyone. It's about all. Now, egoism. This is where you're looking out for yourselves. What is best for me? So it's all about me, me, me. And finally, I have seen this come up as an exam question. Ethical relativism relates to the concept that there are relative rights or wrongs rather than absolutes. So this means that some things are wrong ethically are less important than others, which can lead to the acceptance of the practice that anything goes. So perhaps, I don't know, stealing chocolate from a supermarket is less wrong perhaps than murdering someone. Okay, we move on to section 6, organisational values, promoting ethical behaviour. So companies are they have introduced ways in which to promote ethical behaviour. So think about where you work. How do they promote ethical behaviour? So companies promote openness, open and clear disclosure of relevant information to stakeholders, perhaps in the financial statements or perhaps other reports that they might produce. Honesty, tell the truth and avoid misleading the stakeholders, those people that have an interest in your organisation. Accountability, individuals have to be accountable for their actions and subject themselves to scrutiny when carrying out their duties. Be respectful to people at all levels. Trust. The organisation should ensure that it is in a position to be trusted by its stakeholders. And empowerment. Empower staff to allow them to behave ethically in all situations. So if perhaps in an organisation you see someone behaving unethically, you empower employees to report that behaviour by having different means in the organisation to be able to do so. Okay, section 7, ethical conflicts and dilemmas. Now, these you will see come up again in your F8 paper for auditing, but they are important for you to be aware of at this stage in your studies as well. So, threats to compliance with the fundamental principles. Now, just a quick reminder, what are these fundamental principles? We saw them at the top here, the fundamental principles of the IFAC code, the SIPOP. And so, these are the key threats. The threat of self-interest, having shares in the company. So largely these apply to auditors, but they could apply to different roles as well. So if you're an auditor, you have to be seen to be independent, and you have to be seen to be giving an objective view on the statements, financial statements, and therefore you shouldn't have shares in the company that you're auditing. And so I know the Big Four, they make you sign an annual declaration of independence. I do not have shares in any of the clients that I audit. Self-review, for instance, preparing the financial statements and auditing them. You shouldn't do that because you're effectively reviewing your own work. You won't be able to give an honest, objective view on it. Advocacy, promoting a supplier company run by a family member. So you shouldn't be seen to be an advocate. Perhaps a client is involved in stock listing. Now, you shouldn't be seen to be advocating that. You have to be independent from the client. Familiarity, not appointing the family member as a non-exec director. They need to be independent from the organisation. And intimidation, not threatening an employee with the sack if they don't perhaps agree with your opinion on something, or as if the auditors refuse to sign the audit opinion. Give me a true and fair view or I'll break your legs. So you shouldn't allow intimidation to prevent you from being independent. Safeguards, so these are the threats. So what do I do about them? Well, provide education and training to accountants, and this is what you have to do when you apply for ACCA membership. CPD requirements. CPD stands for Continuous Professional Development. And this fulfills that requirement, fundamental principles of IFAC, professional competence and due care. What else have we got? Have professional standards in place that people have to adhere to, and maybe have your work reviewed externally by a third party. So just be aware of these. At this point in your studies, you just need to have an idea about what these are. Later on in your studies, you'll have to be able to write about them. Okay, section 8, conflict resolution on ethical dilemmas. So there are examples given in the notes of ethical conflicts. So being expected to act contrary to legal or professional requirements, lying or misleading others, issuing reports that misrepresent the facts. So you're misstating results, you're misleading the auditors. So what do you do about it? So if you are faced with an ethical question, what do you do? Well, steps 1 to 4. Consider the facts and the ethical issues involved. Consider the fundamental principles related to the situation. Consider any established internal procedures and consider alternative courses of actions. So this is what you do, and then take action. So consult with the line manager or a board or an audit committee. So in an accountancy department, you have a technical department. or you have somebody like the money laundering reporting officer. If unresolved, obtain advice from your institute, the ACCA, seek legal advice, withdraw from the assignment, or resign. And these are given in the order of the actions that you should take. So if you work in a company, for instance, it's quite hard to push back, which is why you have whistleblowing. But you also have these steps that you should take in response to ethical dilemmas. Okay, well done. That brings us to the end of chapter 6. What I would do now, what I would recommend is go into your question banks and have a look at a whole load of questions that test you on professional ethics. Well done. This brings us to the end of the F1 course. If you have any questions, please contact your tutor, but all the very best for your exam. Thank you very much.